Well, hello, my next level friends. Welcome to another episode of the Artist Next Level podcast. I am very happy, very excited to be here with you, along with my good friend Drew Harris, and we have a special guest we're going to tell you about in a second. It's going to be a really great episode, particularly if you are a painter, and more specifically, if you are an acrylic painter. So if you've been working with acrylics, or maybe you've been thinking about acrylics, or maybe trying some of the acrylic mediums, well, today is an episode that you want to save, that you want to pass on to other artists as well, that you want to pay a lot of attention to because it's really good. We have our good guest, Rhéni Tauchid, who she's an artist, she's a writer, an acrylic medium educator, and Tri-Art co-owner, and it's going to be a fabulous chat.
Resources, inspiring interviews, business practices, and practical advice to take your art career to the next level. Join Sergio Gomez in today's Artist Next Level and get ready to take control of your career.
Hey, Drew, good to see you, my friend. Thank you for joining me again here hosting another show. How are you?
Hello, sir. Yes, I'm great. In fact, I'm so excited because we have this special lady right between us here, Rhéni Tauchid, my good friend, longtime friend. Welcome, Rhéni, to our show, and we are really honored. I know we've talked about this a number of times, and finally we have you right here to talk to. Yeah, we go back a little ways, 25 years, I think, to the first NAMTA show in Toronto, which is, I don't remember what it stands for, but it's a big art fair.
It stands for the National Art Materials Trade Association.
Well, there you go. See, you remember it. And I was a judge. I was one of 3 judges looking at new materials on the market. And Tri-Art happened to be one of the participants. And I thought, and you know, we've all talked about acrylics and how they were years ago, and you know, the development of acrylic. This was a company that stood out, and this was your company, Rhéni. And that I believe that's where I first actually met you and shook hands with you. And I thought your company was the newest product and the best and most exciting product. So I had voted you kind of the new thing for that NAMTA year. And since we've just became, you know, colleagues, and we've worked together, and I still believe the product is the best in the world. And that's my opinion. And I think the opinion of many. So I want to, formally welcome you here. I think it's fantastic. There's a lot of new developments, new books, lots to talk about. So let's proceed.
Well, thank you, Drew, and thank you, Sergio, for inviting me to be part of the Next Level podcast. This is pretty exciting. I mean, you've both been doing such great things in the art materials world, like for the artists, really sharing your practices and, you know, talking about processes and, you know, the business of being an artist, you know, both like from the business side, but also the creative side, the spiritual side, and all those things come together. And yes, Drew, we have known each other a long time at when that was, I believe, in 98.
Yes, that's right.
So
we're looking at about 25 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So wow. you were in your reds phase then. Very, very red. All of Drew's paintings were very red.
And that's the red I fell in love with when I saw.
That's the red he fell in love with too. Everybody
talks about natural red light.
That's right. Well, and there is a reason for that, and that is your product. Really, that was the only red that we could, that would, you'd put it down on a canvas, and it stayed that way. It didn't dry out and go deep in or anything like this. You had the best product, and it was really science-based product. It wasn't a it wasn't just a casual product that is picked up from other sources. You guys really scientifically worked on these things.
Yes, when the founders of Tri-Art started out, I wasn't one of the founders. I came to it a little bit later, but they really, they wanted to create something that was not just any old paint, but something that really celebrated color. So it wasn't, part of it was about the acrylic being the base of that paint. Absolutely. And then there's more about that part that I can get into later. But it was all about color saturation and using pigments, and especially a lot of the pigments that were probably a little bit less known at the time, because this was the mid 90s and things were still very traditional. Most paint manufacturers were dealing with traditional color, and words like quinacridone and phthalocyanine and pyrrole and naphthol, those were not common. They weren't commonly known yet. So people would say, what is this quin, how do you say that?
Yeah. Oh, it warms my heart just even saying those. Pyrrole red, quinacridone red. Oh my God.
Yeah, those, because we were, previous to that, we were in a world of cadmiums and hansas, and all those pigments still exist, but there's been such tremendous development in pigment technology over the past few decades that it's really a wonderful thing to be part of a company that gets to use those pigments.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, Rhéni, in last episode, Drew and I, we shared a little bit of our story of how we came into our love for our medium. I would love, for you, if you can bring us back a little bit to your origin story. You becoming an artist, and then also your love for acrylic. What really got you into that particular medium to the point of, working for the company, owning a company, and eventually, becoming an educator on the particular medium, writing a number of books, which two of them, which I have here, and I should say signed by you. Thank you for that. So, to the point, of becoming an author and an authority when it comes to that medium. It's hard to find people like that.
Okay, well, that's a whole lot of questions.
Let's start from the beginning.
Okay, I'll start from the beginning.
The origin story.
I've never been anything but a creative person. I never really had any aspirations to do anything else. I didn't really ever start being an artist. That's just who I was. That's just who I am. I've always drawn, always painted, I have always sung. I've always, so everything, and I've always written as well. Everything that I've done has always been sort of in that creative sphere. I was never terribly good at math. But I was always intrigued by science. My father's a geochemist, so that was always part of my world. And so the chemistry came, like, it's something that I understand. But when it comes to painting, I started out, as most kids do, with things like poster paints and watercolors.
Right.
And as I developed as an artist, or as a painter, I should say, in grade school, I became more and more frustrated with watercolor because I wanted lushness, and I didn't know how to get that. And there are some wonderful watercolor painters who can develop that lushness, but I wasn't able to do it. It wasn't a language that I understood very well. And so I was constantly doing things like digging into my watercolor pans and almost applying them dry to my paper, trying to get as much color as I could out of there. So, like, not using them the way they were intended. And I guess this is what started me really playing with paint and trying to push them beyond their limits. So when I first discovered acrylics, it was like, oh, okay, so now I can have opacity when I want opacity, transparency when I want transparency, and I can also cover things up if I want to, which you can't do with watercolor, right?
Yeah.
because it's constantly rehydrating. So the permanence of acrylics was a new and intriguing thing to me. So that was probably, I don't know, high school time. And then university, I started out in fine art, and we started with acrylic paints. And they were sort of the workhorses for the rudimentary things, right? So you're doing your color theory, you're learning life drawing and painting and just, doing a lot of sort of more thumbnail kind of ideas. And then when it came to sort of the meat of the course, the professors were like, okay, now you have to go get your real paints. So here's this is your list of oil paints that you need to get. At which point I'd already run out of money. So because I'd spent all my money on art books and phone bills and everything else. So so I
and
never
where was that? Where was your education?
I started at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, in fine art, and I didn't stick to it. I got quickly frustrated, but the paint wasn't the frustrating part. That was something else. But so when everybody else was working with their oil paints, I still just had my acrylic paints, and I had to try to make them look like oil paints. I had to stretch them. I had to, and I got very frustrated. And I remember one time I had sort of finished my assignment, so I had all this spare paint, and I was wearing these glass earrings, and I started dipping my earrings into my remaining paint, and then decorating my earrings, and I had this plastic lid, and the paint wasn't sticking to it; it was peeling off of it. So then I was taking pieces of that paint and then attaching it to other things. So I started working with acrylics in a sculptural way, completely by accident. And I still liked them, but I felt like there was something missing because I couldn't get the transparency that I wanted with them, and the texture that I wanted with them. I mean, keep in mind, this is university, so I'm dealing with, really inexpensive student paints. I didn't even have artist grade paints. I gave up fine art after my first year, and then did a number of other things. Ended up with a degree in performing arts in drama from Queen's, because I got frustrated with not being able to express myself with paint, and then thinking that maybe this wasn't for me, and maybe I needed to try some other side of my creative self.
Right.
So,
but you went back to it. It's come full circle in your life.
I did. I went back to it, after a few years of, waitressing and
we call it multitasking.
Multitasking. Yeah. I called it squandering my 20s.
Squandering. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, it was an experimental time in my life. Let's just say, I tried the acting thing, and I just didn't, my heart wasn't in it. I kept thinking that it was, and it wasn't. I tried the singing thing, and that also, those are both things that I really loved. I really loved doing theater. I loved doing musical theater. I loved singing, but I didn't love them as a career. I didn't, it was something that I felt was much more sort of just my personal thing. And I love being part of an ensemble, but there was always something missing. And eventually I rediscovered my voice, I suppose, as somebody who was doing visual art. It took a while and a lot of fits and starts, because this type of work that I'd been doing when I was in my teens and in my early 20s was much more representational. And
do you feel like it was?
Pardon?
Sorry, but I was going to say, do you feel like now that these are a few years on since your university days as a painter?
Oh yeah.
You went on to become, doing acting and singing, and But in that same time, the acrylic market, the paint companies out there,
Mhm.
the common paint companies, were also progressing and doing
Yes.
different things. So that that probably had some influence on you. And you say, well, you know, it wasn't so good when I was in university, but look at the product now.
Yeah.
Let's go back and
Well,
study that.
I started working in an art supply store because
Mhm.
I was teaching art. I was teaching art to kids, and that's when I really started discovering the possibilities of what was out there in terms
Yes.
of paint. And that was when I first, so this would be the early 90s, about 91, 92. And I discovered acrylic mediums. And
Yes.
that was the
Opened up
beginning
the
of a
door.
very
That
long love
change
story.
everything.
Now these
Oh,
mediums,
yeah.
let me ask you, the mediums, were they locally based, as in the company that you know very well today, or was this mediums coming in
Oh no,
other
this was
companies
prior because Tri-Art incorporated in 94. So
in
this was
'94?
prior
Right.
to Tri-Art. But
Mhm.
but companies out there, you know, acrylic manufacturers were producing some basic mediums. So there was a gel mediums, there was, you know, polymer mediums, and there was the beginnings of some textural mediums as well. But it was really the
Mhm.
gel medium that got me going.
Right.
And that's when I started really exploring how this stuff worked, because prior to that I didn't
Mhm.
know what acrylic paint was, right? I didn't understand the chemistry of it, and I never
Yes.
really thought about it. And I think that was a big part of why I quit fine art, because when I first went into fine art, I had expected to learn more about materials
Mhm.
rather than
Right.
this is how you paint. This is, you know,
Mhm.
paint a profound thought, or,
Right.
you know, take the
You
work
had that
of
in.
this master and interpret it in the work of another master. And so it was so much more about the theory of art
Mm,
making, and I'm sort of looking into yourself as an artist. But I felt I wasn't prepared to do that yet because I didn't know how to manipulate my tools.
Mhm.
that's right.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like asking somebody who is in chef school to come up with the most wonderful, you know, recipe creation they could think of without understanding how baking
The
works,
components. Yeah.
or, you know, or just understanding your, not only your ingredients, but the methods with which you can manipulate them,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's in your DNA, your father being a, you know, scientists or in the science world.
Mhm.
And I think that, you know, clearly is your interest, and you've now pursued it. Uh,
Yeah.
the back end of what we commonly known as the acrylic market, which we use around the world today, probably in a majority, there's more acrylic painters than there are oil painters, for example. That may
Mhm.
not be true. That's only my thinking on it. But you really are one of the developers now of the sort of the back end of all of this in what we use today. And we don't know what goes into it, or most of us don't, like you do. But the quality of the work and the acrylic mediums today are so beautiful.
Mhm.
Many of us don't care as long as it gets us our product. You know, we don't really need to know how that medium is made, because it's giving
No,
us the
but
ability to make what we want without questioning it. But in back in the '80s or in the early '90s or whenever when acrylics were developing, there wasn't that quality yet, and you
yeah.
guys really have
Well,
brought
I
that
mean, it wasn't
level
just
up.
acrylics that were evolving, it was all plastics were evolving. You know, if you
True.
look at
Yeah.
the evolution of plastics from Bakelite to what it
Yeah.
is now, there are so many different types of plastic, and they're constantly changing. So in the acrylic formulation, the pigments, there's an evolution in pigments, but it's much slower.
Mm.
You know, it's something that's fairly established, but the evolution of the plastic material itself is always changing. So from the time that Tri-Art started to now, the raw materials are evolving and becoming better and better. They're becoming more clear. The tensile strength is improving. Like all of that kind of stuff is changing because it is not a static material. So when you're looking at something like an oil paint, if it's a linseed oil based, linseed oil is linseed oil. It comes from a plant.
And that's as far as it's going to go.
That's, yeah. I mean, there's definitely evolutions in terms of the way that it's refined and there's definitely nuances to it, but the basic ingredient is oil and pigment. And with watercolor, you have gum arabic or gum acacia and pigment, or honey, or something that's a natural material, because the purpose of any paint is to stick color to a surface.
Yes.
By whatever means necessary. Right. So if that's encaustic, it's wax. If it's watercolor, it's gum arabic. If it's oil paint, it's oil. With acrylic, it's acrylic, which is a thermoplastic.
Yes.
But none of those other materials are evolving the way that plastics are evolving and will continue to evolve. So I'm really curious to see what acrylic paint is going to look like 20 years from now.
Yeah.
It's going to keep changing.
Yeah. Very, very
it's going
true.
to keep improving.
Yeah. So what makes Rhéni, what makes a good acrylic paint? For all our friends who may be listening, you're trying to decide which paint should I use? What constitutes a good acrylic paint?
Well, primarily if you're looking at an artist grade paint, there's a difference between artist grade and, say, student grade or developing artist grade. With an artist grade,
maybe you can explain that. Yeah.
Sure. I'll start with the artist grade paint. What you're looking for is something that is as pure as possible. So the simplest recipe will always be the purest paint. So, for example, the Tri-Art liquid acrylics are a very simple recipe. It's acrylic, pigment, and then there's a few other things in there that basically facilitate that combination. You've got surfactants, you've got biocides and fungicides, you've got glycol that helps it stay wet. And things that give it freeze thaw stability, and
Or you say that's simple?
Yeah, that's pretty much it, right? So that when you are looking at the paint film, if you're looking at a really good quality paint film, you'll notice in a finest quality line, all the colors will look slightly different in terms of their sheen. Because because the acrylic itself is really, really glossy, but all the pigments are different in terms of their particle size and the pigment particle shape too, and also synthetic organics and inorganic colors, pigments also appear different. They're a lot of different sizes and different opacities. So if you're looking at a palette, a color, like a color chart, hand painted color chart, for example, of a finest quality line, an ultramarine blue will be very, very matte, whereas a quinacridone will be very glossy, because that has to do with the pigment particle size. The larger the pigment particle, the more matte the color will appear.
I see. Wow.
So, but I'm getting a little bit more into it than I wanted to initially to answer your question. To answer your question, you want the finest quality paints will have the least amount of fillers or no fillers at all. When you're looking at a student paint, there's a ratio between the liquids and solids that has to be always maintained in an acrylic. And in a student paint, you have to reduce the cost. That's the main thing, right? So in order to reduce that cost, you have to take out the most expensive thing, which is the pigment. So there's a lot less pigment in there. So you're taking away solids, and then so you're having to add more water. So
would this be a cause of that? What I referred to earlier was, with your paints, particularly the liquid acrylics, which are the high end, artist grade. And then we often see across the world these cheaper products. They're student grade, and they're the ones that look great in a jar, and then you put it down on a painting, and all of a sudden your whatever was beautifully bright red
when it dries.
When it dries, it's this dull kind of blood red.
Yes, absolutely.
So is that the reason why?
Yeah. So part of it is they've taken color away, right? Because you have to reduce the cost, so you have to reduce the pigment, but you also have to reduce the acrylic itself, because the binder in the acrylic is also part of the expense, right? So you need to fill that up with something. So there's fillers that go into paint. So sometimes there are clay fillers, sometimes there are other things. But what that does is it changes the way that paint looks from wet to dry.
Yes.
Right. So the more pigment there is in a paint, the less the change is from wet to dry.
I see.
Right. So if you're looking at something like a wall paint, when you first paint it on your wall, it's a lot darker.
Right.
And then it goes.
And then it dries.
Actually, is it or is it lighter? No, it goes darker. Of course. Yeah.
No,
darker.
Sorry. Wait.
Yeah, it goes darker when it dries.
The other way.
It goes darker when it dries.
Yeah. It goes darker when it dries. Yes.
Yeah.
I
just painted a wall like yesterday, so I remember.
Yeah. So there's a big change. So the less pigment there is, the more of a change there is from wet to dry. That has to do with a couple of things, but I don't want to get too technical on you guys.
No, but that is great. That's just a lot of information
it's a very good information for a lot.
We don't learn in art school any of this. So
no, and this is why I started writing books, because they don't teach you this stuff.
No.
But the other part is when you're taking away the acrylic, you're taking away the part that makes it flexible.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the lower the binder is in the paint, the less flexible your paint film is. So that's why student grade paints will crack more easily.
Yes.
And also be more absorbent.
And that's one of the things we love about acrylic paint, how flexible it is, how manual, easy to manage over just about every surface.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
something interesting I want to ask about, speaking of that, I know when I did a residency with you at Tri-Art, 2017, I believe, you had in the studio that I was using, there was a beautiful dress, I seem to recall, and it was entirely made of acrylic sheets, where it was painted on to you created the color and what you wanted onto a board, which again you've produced as well at Tri-Art, and then you peel off this acrylic sheet, and it's malleable. It's you can change it. You can use it in sculpture.
Yes, it is.
Or sculpturally.
Yes.
And that dress or that jacket, I believe, was completely done in acrylic. And then stitched, and you did whatever you needed.
It wasn't even
just
stitched.
Like
it was all acrylic. It was 100% acrylic, except for a little bit of metal.
I see.
So
this is the flexibility of this product, and that.
Yeah.
So how is that jacket today? How many years ago? So 5 years ago now.
It's fine. It's kind of stretched a bit.
But it's still malleable. Well, you use this as a good example.
Yeah, it's still flexible. Yeah. And I made that for my second book, which came out in 2009. So I would have made that in 2006, I think.
I see. Speaking of, so we have, is this the 2009 book, or is that?
That's the 2009 book. The jacket is sort of towards the back.
Okay. And I'll just, you go ahead and I'll find it, and I'll show a picture of it.
Yeah. So Sergio, to answer your question, it's the thing to look for when you're looking for a paint really is go for an artist quality. Yeah, that's my jacket.
There it is. Wow, look at that.
Look at it.
It's made out of acrylic.
Now, there's a good.
Wow.
So that really proves the flexibility of acrylic.
That was made with semi-gloss gel, the whole thing.
Okay. All right. Wow. Good. Excellent.
Yeah. Artist grade acrylics are worth buying. And I know that they're more expensive, but like anything that is really good quality, a little goes a very long way. You
Yes.
can take a very small amount of artist acrylic and think about it like you would, like as if it were like a very expensive perfume. You only want a small amount for it to be beautiful.
Yeah. Well, this is
it's like
why
a concentrated
your
orange
acrylics.
juice.
Yeah. Well, your liquid acrylics. That was the first thing that that popped out in the NAMTA show many, many years ago. Was this really intense liquid acrylic? And I remember the bottles clearly to this day, and that you could just use just a little drop into a medium, even into water. If you were doing sort of a watercolorish based thing, your color intensity was so amazing. But it was an expensive product, even then, because there was some science put into it. There was some thinking, and the mediums that you were using within that, intense product was a little more expensive. So I saw the value in that.
It's about finding the right pigments too. So you need to get pigments that are, anything that goes into our finest quality is a very light fast, has excellent light fastness. If it doesn't get into that series.
Can you explain that just briefly? Light fastness.
So light fastness basically means something that will not be affected by UV light.
Okay.
Right. So it won't fade or change. There are many pigments that will fade or change over time, and the ones that we use in the finest quality line do not. So they have excellent or very good light fastness. Right. There's only one
way to
in that line that does not, and that's our phosphorescent pigment. That's just, it's a pigment. The phosphorescent pigment glows in the dark. So eventually it will change color a little bit and lose its ability to
glow in the dark,
to emit light.
Yes, yeah. I see.
But the reason that we have it in our finest quality line is we have so much of that pigment in there that it makes it too expensive to put in our student line at that level. So it's a really good glow in the dark paint.
Glow in the dark.
It just glows a lot better than the other ones.
Let's go into talking about you as a writer.
Wait, Drew, I have one more question about color before you go into another topic.
Okay.
Because I think one of the most difficult, in my opinion, working with acrylic, one of the most difficult is the color black. Acrylic black, when it dries, it tends to look plasticky, right?
It is plastic.
Well, yeah, but I mean, of course. But I mean, like, usually when it comes out of the tube, and I found, again, talking about quality, the higher the quality of the paint, also, like, the black is richer. The density of that black, and you can tell, after you have seen a lot of work and a lot of painting, the richness of a black versus another one. Is there a difference on how a black is made versus a typical other color?
No, I think it's primarily a difference of pigment and pigment strength.
Is that large? As you referred to this whole large, what are they?
Particle
pigments. Yeah. So would it be a larger in that case?
No,
and that was
actually,
why it becomes
carbon black. Well, there's different blacks. There's different pigments.
Lamp black.
Carbon
black.
Carbon black, which is the sort of the most middle, the black.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is what I like rich.
Dark, because some of them sort of shift a little bit more brown or are more translucent.
That's right.
But carbon black is a very, very fine pigment. So
which is going to give you your most intensity. It's if you liken it to something like the matrix on your computer screen, the higher resolution of dots is going to give you the more intense color.
Yes.
If you look at it in that sort of way.
Yeah.
Low resolution, which is less dots, will give you this sort of grainy gray look. Right.
So there's a lot of, there's so many different things happening in the pigment world. And I mean, I don't really, I'm not in the lab. They give me stuff and they say, hey, test this out, see how it works. I mean, I'm always asking questions and things like that, but I'm certainly not a paint chemist, and I'm not privy to all of the information that's there, because it's not my focus right now. But there's a lot of different things in the industry, different raw materials, and some of them that will also give you sort of like a false color. Some of them where you're buying something and you can put it in, it'll look like a lot of color, but it actually isn't a lot of color. So it's a bit of an optical illusion that happens there. And so these kinds of things, there's so many different ways to cut corners in terms of costs. But generally, you'll find that those manufacturers who are creating a true artist product are doing their due diligence, and they're making the recipes the best that they can. And what they're doing is, if they want to intensify a color, they're just making sure there's a lot of pigment in there, because that's the only way to do it. Right.
Yeah.
That you can't, there's certain things that you can't hide, especially if you manipulate your pigments with a lot of mediums, which is something that I do. So I'm always stretching them. I very rarely use them full strength. I use them with a lot of water. I use them with a lot of mediums. And when you do something like that, you sort of uncover the nuances of that pigment.
Yes.
Right.
Well, we're going to probably show examples of your work. In this video, we'll cut some images of your work, and it really explains it well on how you extend those surfaces by dragging that color in multiple degrees, in levels of intensity. So you get to really see the flexibility of the color itself, and the mediums used in a quite a wide scale on your paintings, which is why I've always been intrigued by your work. You become this luminous, or there's a luminosity to your work, right? You're using it in layers, and you can really define what paints you did in a certain process. It's really
that's good, because I can't define that.
Well, I can. And I watched I was able to see your studios, and I got to see work in progress and so forth. And we work similarly, you and I.
We do.
As does Sergio.
We do work similarly. And I've learned so much from you as well, Drew.
Well, thanks.
There's something about I've always been drawn to a horizon line and delineating bands of color. And that's something that I, have been doing for a while, but I probably learned that from you.
Well, thank you. I'm deeply grateful for that.
There you go.
But I want to go back. I really want to talk about your books, because that's, we've at the Art Next Level, we on a number of occasions, I have posted your book, your newest book, which of course is the Acrylic Mediums book, and here we are, right there. Oops, sorry, and there we are. So this I have to say is the Bible of the acrylic world, I think. I have promoted it a number of times, only because I know it's the most important thing. It's accurate, and it's well written, and it's well illustrated. There's no falseness to it. A lot of other acrylic books that I've read in the past been they wash over with the sort of tricky stuff. You really go into the meat of it, which is beautiful. All your books, I've got 2 of them here. Sergio's got 1. Or no, you've got the other one. You've got the third.
I got both. Yeah, no, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. There's an honesty to your writing, and I want you to talk about the reason for going into writing.
Sure.
And what was there a message not being told to the public in a way? You wanted to go deeper into a publication, so people get a better knowledge, and they make better choices that way.
Well, I've always written for myself. I was a very keen journal keeper in my youth. And then sort of in the early days of Tri-Art, I mean, continuing on for a while, I'm not doing it now anymore, but I was the one writing all the literature for the company. So I was writing the brochures, and so that was more technical writing. But I've always been a big reader, and I've always written, really cringy journals. But one of the things that I discovered about myself when I was in high school was I dearly love research. I really love researching a subject. And I used to get really bogged down, writing essays, because I would get too far into the research that I would sort of lose the plot in terms of like how, how that essay was going to sort of like come together, because I had so many things I wanted to bring to it. I was asked by a publisher. Again, this was at another one of those trade shows where I had done our booth, right? So we had it was like a 10 by 20 foot booth, and I had painted a floor cloth. I had painted all of the displays, and I had and two of those displays, I believe, were triangular, and they were lit from the inside, and I had done some paintings on plexiglass, so they were light boxes. Clearly. So I had done some acrylic paintings that were backlit, and then I had all of these painted examples everywhere. So everything was about education, acrylic color, texture, and different ways of approaching it. And the acquisitions editor for Watson Guptill books came to our booth and was, sort of intrigued by everything. And then she asked me if I, had ever done any writing, if I'd be interested in writing a book, because they were looking for someone to write a book about acrylics. And at that time, there hadn't really been anything published about acrylic painting of note since I would say maybe 5 years previous. And that was primarily about how to paint different subject matters in acrylic.
Yes. Yeah.
And a little bit about the material, but not a lot. I asked her what type of book she was interested in, and she just said, just something about modern acrylic painting. So
it did well, like the first book.
Yeah. So I pitched this idea to her, and I said, I really want this to be a book about how this material works, not what you're going to paint with it.
Yes.
So not painting a still life with acrylics or painting a portrait with acrylics. That's never been my focus. But
you use examples throughout all of your books of various artists and how they've used,
which is very helpful.
Which is very, very helpful. Yeah.
Excellent. Because again, going back to the chef analogy, I really feel like in order to be able to integrate these paints really well into your art practice, you need to understand them. You need to understand your tools.
Yes.
Because that way you can manipulate them, and then you can use them to,
get the best results,
to express your own vision, your own way. Not having somebody spoon feed you the step-by-step of how to paint a Drew Harris landscape.
That's right. Yeah. Well, we have the same philosophy here. I know Sergio, this is why we hooked up and connected many years ago, was for that very reason. We're not going to tell you what to do. We're going to teach you all of the back end on how to, so there's a great philosophy, that we share in this, in how you think in production of your books, which makes you a world leader really in this form of this genre of writing. And I think in Sergio's case with the Art Next Level, he's built a following that knows that what he says is, more on the back end, how to prepare yourself, how to get ready, how to move, how to prepare your websites and social media. It's up to you to what you put out there, how you use it.
Yeah.
But
and I feel that's what touches people the most when they're looking through my books, is they're looking at it as I'm trying to give them a tool for them.
Yes.
It's not just look at me and how I'm doing my thing. It's like, so everybody's, sort of feeling a point of connection. They're like, oh,
Yes.
that's how I can use that to do what
Yes.
I want to do. And I think that's that's what everybody's looking for always, is just like, is, how to express yourself, your own vision.
Yeah.
So that book did quite well, and it's still in print. It's sold, I don't know, over 60,000 copies so far.
Wonderful.
Something
Wonderful.
like that.
That's the first. That's the
That's
first.
the first book, yeah, and that one was translated into Dutch and into German.
Wow.
Ooh.
And it was, I think, it also striking from a creative standpoint, and Sergio will appreciate that, as will most of our listeners. The graphic quality to that book is spectacular. Just the look of the cover was different. You knew you were going to get into something that was sort of meaty and, good information. And I think that's all your books have brought that, particularly your last one.
Well,
which,
I really tried. Thank you for noticing.
I
had
the photography is amazing. Yeah.
I had a fantastic photographer. Jonathan Sugarman did the photography for all three of my books. And my friend, Grace Polyanis, she worked with me on a lot of the visuals as well, and did quite a bit of the styling. My intent going forward with these books in terms of the visuals, with the first book in particular, was about being as clean as possible, because I found that so many art books were so messy. All the photography was so messy. It was just like, here's my messy studio. Here's my old tin can that I'm washing my brushes in.
Yeah.
And it was just like, no, this stuff is awesome looking.
Right.
Why do you need to have it all mucked up with all this other stuff around it?
Absolutely.
Just show the material like a cookbook. So it's always going back to the whole food analogy.
Wonderful. Yeah.
And in the first book, even though I am part of the Tri-Art family, I worked really hard to make everything generic. Make every product in that
not so specific towards
was generic. There was no product names on anything, on any of the acrylics, on any of the tubes. Everything was blank, so that it wasn't about, this is Tri-Art. It was about, this is acrylic. I'm trying to explain acrylics at their core. And
so
and
Sergio, you've got two of her books, and I've got two as well. I've got three, actually.
You should have three.
I did,
No, actually, yes, I do have the three, because two are soft covered, and then the hardcover. Yeah, no, I do have the three.
Yeah, you have three.
Okay, you have three.
You
I've only
have
got
three
two.
because your paintings are in all three of them.
I know.
You're contributing.
But I somehow, over the years, I've missed the first. I know I had the first one.
Okay, I'll send you another one. I got to send you another one. I got to get more.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, but I wanted to ask Sergio how you felt when you first received these books, and because you are, I'll speak for Sergio here. An accomplished painter, drawer, large scale acrylic user. You're not an oil painter. At least I don't know if you are, but you use acrylics on a large scale. And particularly lately, because you are using acrylics in a really beautiful, vibrant colors, and your reds and your all of that are really important to you as a painter. How, when you picked up her books, did you immediately get inspired to? I assume you did, but I'm going to say, did you get inspired to just sort of drop everything and get into the studio and take some of these?
Well, what I really loved about the books first was the depth of information, and particularly in my case, and I think that's what I love about your books, that any artist who picks them up, who's working in acrylic, they will find something that they may be working with, or they might have questions about, and they will find some answers. In my case, I've been very intrigued about mediums. Nowadays, there are so many mediums that do so many things, and that's actually the section that I went to first. I went to learn more about mediums, look at mediums, because, you understand for paint, because we use it, right? We apply color with the paint and so on. But the moment you start adding mediums and mixing it with different mediums, the paint behaves differently.
Yes.
those different
Yeah.
things. And that, to me, that was like my favorite part in your books, learning more about mediums. Maybe we can spend a little bit of time, talking about, the consistency of mediums. We talk about how paint, works with the pigment, but how about on transparent mediums,
Yeah. Well, the question of mediums was the entire reason why I wrote the third book.
Okay.
Yes.
I had an editor asked me to do another book, and she basically left it up to me. She's like, "What do you want to talk about?" I said, "I want to talk about mediums because there still is mine. I think is the only one single book that is dealing 100% with acrylic mediums. Just what are all these jars of whitish goo?"
Yes, exactly.
Because like when you go into an art supplies store and you get to the medium shelf, it's all really similar looking. They're all mostly white or off-white, and they all do similar things. So why are there so many of them, and what are the differences between all of them? So that's the subject of my third book. Acrylic, what is it called? Acrylic Mediums and Methods.
Yes, you should know that.
I should know that.
Contemporary Guide to Materials.
The title's never the first thing, the title, it's never, I mean, my working title for my first book was called Jazzing the Acrylic Mediums, but
I like that.
the publishers didn't go for it because people, because when you're categorizing things, you don't want it under jazz. So anyway, the most basic acrylic medium is acrylic paint that has no pigment in it.
Yes.
And even though that's so basic, there's a lot of people that just don't know that. They're like, what is gel medium? Gel medium is the same as ultramarine blue without the ultramarine blue. It's just acrylic paint, and it's white because when the water is when the acrylic is surrounded by water, it appears white. It's kind of like when you are looking at a cloud. What is that white? That white is water droplets. When the water droplets evaporate, there is no more cloud. There is just sky. So with acrylic mediums, with a gel medium, it's white. And then as the water evaporates out of the paint film, it begins to clarify. And then so you're left with a transparent film. So that is the essence of an acrylic medium. And then there's so many different nuances to that. So as I was saying earlier, acrylics are very, very glossy. That is their natural state. Their natural state is to be very glossy and to be very, very thin. So a gloss gel, for example, is an acrylic that has had the water component thickened. And there's different ways of thickening it. There's different materials that you can thicken it. There's different levels of thickening. So that's why you have some acrylic mediums that can hold a lot of texture. And then you have some that are more like a shampoo-like consistency, or like a creamy, like a heavy cream consistency. And then there's also different types of acrylic resin. So just like there's so many different types of plastics, we have acrylics that will hold a peak, and then when it dries, that peak will remain there. And then we have other acrylics.
Those are your self-leveling gels and
so self-leveling gels, where no matter what you do to that material, it's still viscous and thick, but it will eventually level out completely.
So I have a whole shelf of these things that I brought back, and I've been using for years. And I use them so sparingly because I can't get your product here easily.
I have to try some of them. I have to try.
It's an unbelievable product. At the top coat, which there were some issues at the beginning, I think, when you first developed that, with not being aware of how we needed to use it. And but in the end, what happened in one of my paintings anyway, it cracked. But it cracked because I used the product improperly. I didn't put it on a restrainer. I didn't put it on a good solid surface. So the flexibility of it was, it was just like taking a window, glass and trying to bend it. You're not going to get it to bend.
No, and these are the growing pains of a material like acrylic,
Learning
because
it,
they are relatively young in the art materials world, right? These have only been around since the early 50s, and any tests that you can do are accelerated tests, and they're not always necessarily accurate, because you can't plan for every eventuality, and you never know what the heck artists are going to be doing, right? What they're going to be mixing, what they're mixing, what the layers are underneath.
I mix a lot of charcoal with my paint, for example.
Yeah, and that's fine. But one time I used a lot of graphite as a layer in my paint, and then my next layer peeled right off, because graphite, like, it's like Teflon.
Right. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I just learned something already right there.
Yeah, but these are the types of things that you learn over time. But as paint manufacturers and developers, we can only anticipate so many things. We can only test for so many things. We test for freeze-thaw stability. We test we test things for humidity and aging and drying, and we test all of our paint. Obviously when it's made, but also after 2 months, after 6 months.
Yes. Yeah.
After a year.
You have a very thorough. You have a.
We do. We have a very rigid quality control in our lab. But that being said, we can't anticipate. This is. We only know these things for our products. We don't know what happens if you mix our product with something else, for example, or if you're putting it on top of something that's not good. I've known so many people over the years that have used, instead of using an artist gesso as their primer, they're using wall paint.
Yes.
Which has almost no binder in it, and it will crack, and it will also and that part of that will get absorbed into the acrylic, and that will change the paint film. Right? Because these layers have to marry onto each other. So if you're putting something onto an inflexible surface doesn't have good adhesion, then
you run into some problems.
Then you're building your house without I-beams. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Hey, can I step in here? We're almost. I think we're at about 57 minutes in this interview. There is something I wanted to get into with you and get your advice on. And that is the environmental issues. Excuse me. The environmental issues. I know that your company is a zero waste product company, and you have a policy of no waste going into the water stream or anything like that. You reuse a lot of your materials. You make a sludge, which I think is brilliant. I commend you for that. How can we as consumers not put your product down the drain, or not even it's just your product, but any kind of acrylic paint, which is plastic, without going into the drains or environmental issues? You have a process, and if you can describe it very basically and very quickly.
Sure.
I think it's brilliant, and I want everyone to know this, because I think it's a very important part of our process as painters.
I want to know it too.
Are you talking about the way I clean my brushes and stuff?
Yes, that's right.
This is really basic.
Okay, this is very good.
It's really basic, and right now it's really useful, because even though I have a wonderful studio in the middle of our factory, which is awesome, and I have windows for the first time in my studio, which is double awesome, I don't have running water in my studio currently. So I've had many studios without running water, and that's always made me very conservative about my water use, which and I know that when I have had water, I've been less careful when I've had running water. So this has taught me a lot of restraint. So what I do is I use a lot of spreading tools, and I use brushes. When I'm using a spreading tool, if it's something that I can peel the paint off of after I'm using it, then I just let it be, and I just let it dry, and then I peel the paint off, and then I can dispose of the paint as a solid.
Okay.
If it's not if it's something that I need to remove the paint from, then I will wipe it with a damp cloth, right? So I always have, I mean, everybody's got, as artists, we all have painty t-shirts, you
Yes,
know,
of course.
that we're
Which
never
has
at a loss
become the
for rags.
rage now.
Yeah.
We're never at a loss for rags. Always use rags. Don't use paper towel. You know, those are single-use things. Use rags because you can always reuse them. And there's something that have been used before. But before I use a rag, if I'm using a paintbrush, for example, so I've done some painting. I've used a color. My brush is still mostly full of paint, and I don't want that color anymore. I have in my studio always a few what I call crappy paintings, and I will put that paint on there. So I'm always taking off as much of the excess paint as I can onto another painting. And sometimes those crappy paintings turn into less crappy paintings, and sometimes they're just my brush cleaning paintings,
right.
and that's fine. It doesn't matter how big it is. It's just or how small. There's always something that I can put it onto, and then I will put my brush in a little bit of water, just a little bit, just to moisten it. And then I will wipe it onto a rag. So I'm wiping the brush onto the rag and getting as much paint as I can out of it. And I'll do this process like 2 or 3 times. And then I have 2 water containers. So I have one that has a very small amount of water, like maybe 3 inches of water in it. And I have another one that's got maybe 5 inches of water in it. So not a lot.
Okay.
I never have a full container of water because I never need it. So in that smaller amount of water, that's when I'll clean my brush. So I'll get as much paint out as I can, and then again, wipe it on a rag. And then after that, I put it into my larger amount of water. And at that point, there's usually hardly any paint. It's just getting rid of any little residue. And then I lay my paintbrush flat to dry. And so then what I do with that water, the cleaner water, which is in the larger amount, I will use for cleaning again. And then the other one I put into a 16-liter pail. And because it's such a small amount of water, it usually evaporates within a couple of days.
Leaving you with a kind of a film or a crust of acrylic.
Yep. And then
paint.
I scrape that out of my bucket and then throw it in the garbage.
That's very good. Very good.
Yeah,
tip
you see, and that's not going into the water stream. And so it's all sort of repurposing itself all the way through. It's recycling.
It's time consuming, but if you make it part of your practice, it just becomes habitual. And it feels very strange to see paint going down the drain.
Yeah, well, today particularly with all our water concerns, even though we have so much water now in the world, but you know, it's still polluting everything. I was fascinated by that.
Yeah. Sorry. Can I just say one more thing? I found a great container because I have some very large brushes, and I found a caddy for cleaning supplies that you get, found from Canadian Tire, from the hardware store. And it was just a plastic caddy that you would put your cleaning bottles in. So it's a good, I would say, 12 inches wide. So I can put that's where I can rinse my brushes in there.
You see, we just did we're just in the middle of a session, a challenge. And one of the videos, which was my video, the second week, talked about redoing your studio and little things that you can do in your studio to improve it, build an island. And you and I work very similarly, Rhéni. So we have these islands, we can walk around, we can teach in our studios. But one of the things that I really want our listeners to consider is their process of cleanup. We can reuse some of that sludge that we pull out of the water into sculptural work. Perhaps, I don't know, one of Canada's top painters, I always reference him, does these relatively realistic paintings, but at the end of the day, he takes this acrylic that he's done and scrapes it on like you do, He takes it off his palette, scrapes it onto another one, and then presents both of those paintings when he does the show. So he's got a very high realism with this abstract, which has the same tonal values.
That's cool. Who
of
is
the
this
painting.
artist?
James Lahey.
James Lahey. Okay,
Yeah, and he's an amazing guy, and he's an extremely proficient painter. So his abstractions become part of the exhibition, and there's no waste. And that wasn't, I don't believe, his real intention at the beginning, but what he's done is sort of naturally no waste.
Well, it tells a story, right?
Yeah, it tells a great story, and it's all linked. So I think if our users can use your method more for whatever mediums they're using, try not to pour it down the drain. Try not to get rid of it that way, and reuse it, repurpose it.
Yeah, and use a good palette. We have the Tri-Art nonstick palette, which is fantastic.
Yes,
because you put your paint down, and you're not wiping something away. You let it dry, and then you can peel it off, and then you have a clean palette. Yes, and then you also then have an acrylic skin that you can do something with.
Yeah. And there's something, I have to say, there's something magical about pulling that skin, isn't it? Like,
it's very therapeutic.
It's therapeutic. Like,
it's
good.
I always find it a really good way to start my day in the studio.
Yes.
Because then I can see the history of what I was doing. I'm like, oh yeah, those two colors did go really nicely together. And look at this, because these little accidents give you little hints as to,
and they could be used again.
But what you can do with them.
Yeah, and you can use these little skins to apply to, because you're working acrylic, you just add another little bit of acrylic, apply it to, I know Sergio does this, he uses paper and onto canvas, and
you can make a
all sorts of great things.
Exactly.
I think this has been a great, hugely valuable conversation.
Been awesome.
Rhéni, I have one admission I have to talk about. Here's I'm going to make amends on something, and that is just funny. Consider we are doing this publicly. So I was very fortunate to be invited by Rhéni and Tri-Art to become, their first artist in residence. And I started in a very small space, and then I was given one of the flagship stores, gallery area and a sort of workshop teaching area as my studio. And inside there was a beautifully set up studio with stainless steel sinks and racks and everything, filled with brushes for the students and that kind of thing. Anyway, so I found this amazing tool that I was using at the time, and it just seemed insignificant. So I was thinking, okay, well, I can't live without this thing. It was such an amazing tool. I did all the work that you and I. You launched the book, your newest book, and I presented my paintings on the same night.
Yes.
At the Isabel Bader Performing Arts Center, and that was an honor for me. You had one half the room, I had the other half, so I was kind of using the product that you were now releasing in your book.
That was a great event.
Anyway, long story short, when I returned home, I just happened to have that little tool with me. And I thought nothing of it, and I thought, and believe me, since it has been the only tool I use. And I thought, well, it was just kicking around in your teaching studio. It surely can't be missed. Well,
okay, I want to know what it is.
Yeah, you gotta give it back, Drew.
It's that brush.
Oh,
the end of that brush, that piece of plastic.
Oh, yeah.
That rubber end is now here with me. And it's been the most invaluable piece of studio tool.
You know how many of those I have? I collect those.
Well, don't tell me that. You're supposed to say, oh, that was my only one. But I'll tell you something. That little thing was so important to me. And, as we're working on these big tables, and we've got lots of paint. And these things are covered in paint, and you set it down somewhere and you lose it. And you go, I know it's somewhere on this table. I just can't find it. So I ended up putting a piece of string around it, and I would wear it around my neck because I kept losing it. And I thought, funny. If I lose this, my career's over.
Your career is over. There you go.
I have never used a tool such as that. And I have even spoken about it in our group. This
It's a
one
color shaper.
little tool.
It's called a color shaper.
Yes, that's right. But it had no handle. It was just a little rubber piece with 3 holes in the end that used to be attached to a handle.
I know, because they always come apart, because if I leave them in water, then the wood, it just,
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought I would admit that to you publicly.
Confession time.
And I'll tell you, it's an honor, and I hope
Happy
you're
to
not
share.
angry with me. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to share your knowledge with, I know Sergio and I were really excited about this. You have a great company. You have a great future. Like you're a great painter. And
Thank you.
wow, the combination is amazing. And we're honored. I'm deeply honored to have this conversation.
Well,
And
that's really
we'll-
high praise coming from both of you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Rhéni. And before we wrap it up too, if you could also share with our friends where can they find Tri-Art products? And I assume they could be purchased online and could be shipped anywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, since COVID, we've been working more and more towards getting things online, and so we do a very robust online market. So the website is tri-art.ca. That's triart.ca, and that's where the product can be purchased from.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to make sure people that made the note CA, not .com, but that CA for Canada.
CA is a Canadian.
Exactly. It's easy to make that mistake and look for with the CO.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Let me double check.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yeah.
I'm deeply proud of that, because I go every time I key it in to look at new product, I'm going CA. Oh, it's Canada. Oh, it's my
There you go.
So,
Yeah, it's triart.ca.
yes.
Very good. Awesome.
Your products, continue to just soar, and I'm really happy for the company, the people that are involved. Now I know some of you within the company. Your factory has just gotten bigger. Everything, I wish you the best of success in the future, and we hope to have you on again to talk more mediums. And I know for a fact, once we launch this podcast to the many people, but particularly to our members at Art Next Level, you're going to get a lot of questions. We are going to get a lot of questions that we are not going to be able to answer. So we may have to have you back on shortly.
For a
For
quick
sure. I would love
Q&A
to
question.
I would love
Yes.
to do a Q&A.
Yes, we'd love to have you. Believe me. So I'll leave the last word to Sergio. And
Thank you. Well, thank you again, both of you, to join us tonight. It's such a great conversation. For all friends listening, please make sure that you share this episode with others. Somebody who works in acrylic. You know who that is. Please send that to them because it could be, again, very useful. Give it a try to the Tri-Art products, and also check out the books. What I'm going to do to make it easy for everyone, in the description of this podcast, either if you're listening to the audio or if you watch later the video, whatever you may be at, in the description, I will put all the links to the social media, the books, and the company. So it makes it a lot easier. Particularly, some of you may be driving or maybe exercising as you listen to the podcast. And this will make it super easy for you when you get back in the studio. Give it a try. It's going to be really great. So thank you, Rhéni, for joining us. Thank you, Drew. Hope you guys have an amazing day. We hope to see you very soon again. And my friend, if you have also questions for Rhéni specifically about acrylic paint, send it to us, either Drew and I, and we'll make sure to maybe put some really good questions together for another quick episode in the future. So thanks again, and we'll see you at the next level. Goodbye.
Check out our website at www.theartistnextlevel.com, where you will find our podcast library, learn about our upcoming webinars, find resources relevant to your career, and much more. Thanks for listening to today's podcast, and we'll see you at the next level.